Hey everybody. Yeah, as Ted mentioned, I started working with PVNet, like you said, 90, 96, 97 when I was a sophomore, junior, and senior in high school, and was actually introduced to the internet as a child or as a young adult through PVNet, and started growing with them, started doing some web development with them, video editing with them, dipped my toe in a bunch of different pools at PVNet, and then decided to go into computer science as my undergrad. Ended up going to graduate with a degree in computer science engineering, and coincidentally, right when I graduated was right when the tech bubble burst, early 2000s. So didn't really have that segue into just becoming a programmer. That was always my original plan. Took a step back, thought about it, ended up taking the LSAT, went to law school, and then became a patent attorney. And I'm currently a patent attorney with a small firm, boutique firm up in the Silicon Valley, up in San Jose. And I've been working with them for around 14 years. And I specialize in hardware and software, majority software style procurement of patents. Not only procurement of patents, but also portfolio development for offensive and defensive patent portfolios, and I can get into that a little bit later. But people utilize patents for a variety of different purposes. You can use them to protect your interests. You can also use patents to go after a competitor in other ways as well. But I get recurring questions from inventors on a regular basis, and a lot of times, the majority of the people that I work with major corporations and acquiring, and building massive patent portfolios. I'm talking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of patents. But on a regular basis, I get inquiries from independent inventors as to, hey, I have this idea. You're a patent attorney. How do I protect my idea? What kind of, what measures can I take to get a patent? Because, everyone's seen those commercials on TV about, I have this idea, I got the new lawnmower or something, I got this patent, I made $1 million. Just call this 1-800-patents thing and get your idea protected. Side note, that's a real horrible idea to call those guys. It's big, they actually make you sign your rights over a lot of times, and it's a real bad idea. But I've kind of developed this sort of strategy or kind of friendly suggestions to protect your idea, just kind of give an individual or independent inventor ideas as to how to proceed with protecting your IP and maybe moving on to the next level if you wanted to eventually start a company around your idea or monetize your idea, etc. So basically, the first thing I wanted to talk about is just the different types of intellectual property protection that are available to you. Because a lot of times people want to patent something and it's not something that can be patented. So for example, there's really 4 basic ways to protect intellectual property as far as I'm concerned. There's copyright, there's trademark, there's trade secret, and there's patents. So I'll go over a few of these in detail before I jump into patents, just so we're really aware of what patent protection covers, the type of ideas. So first, let's talk about copyrights. Copyrights are different than patents. Copyrights protect, I was looking up the Wikipedia, definition. It's intended to protect the original expression of an idea in the form of a creative work, but not the idea itself. So for example, if you're an author, if you're a photographer, it's an expression, it's a work, it's like an idea, it's an individual expression. It's a implementation of a song. So if you're a singer and you sing a recording, if you have a recording of a song, or if you're a photographer and you take an image, and you have a particular image that you can protect via you can protect that type of intellectual property via copyright. But you can't get a patent on like a recording or an image or stuff like that. So that's the type of protection that you're going to be looking for if that's the type of intellectual property you want to protect. With trademark's a little bit different too, because when I received my licensing with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, people kind of group those two things together when in fact they're completely different, and I never deal with trademarks. Trademarks cover, it's a recognizable sign, design, or expression which identifies products or services of a particular source. So a trademark is like your brand logo, your brand name, things like that. And if you have an individual company and you have a identifiable logo or an icon or an image that's associated with your company, that's the type of stuff that deals with that is covered by trademark. That's not the type of stuff that's covered by patents. Just so you have an idea. And then trade secret is another way to protect intellectual property, and it's kind of tangentially related to all of these. Trade secret is more along the lines of, it's like, the way I like to think about it is like the secret recipe for Coca-Cola. Like, Coke didn't patent their recipe. Coke didn't patent anything about that. It's just it's something that the way that they want to protect their ideas is by not telling anybody about it. So they take measures to keep it completely secret from other people. So you may have a novel process for manufacturing an item, or a novel design for some sort of product, or some novel implementation of code for some application that you can create, but it's so novel or it's so unique that you don't want to even tell anybody about it. Trade secrets are a really good way to do that. If it's difficult for people to reverse engineer your product, if it's difficult for people to figure out how it works, and if it's very novel, you might want to consider just not telling anybody about it and keeping it kind of tucked away. Because part of patents is disclosing the secret sauce, how you implement or create your product or process, in exchange for a limited monopoly on that disclosure. So that kind of brings me into patents. So as I mentioned before, patents is kind of like patents. The idea for intellectual property protection in the form of patents goes all the way back to the U.S. Constitution, where it's a trade-off where you say, okay, you provide a disclosure that enables one of reasonable skill in the art to reduce your product to practice. And in exchange for that, you get a limited monopoly on that particular implementation for a predetermined period of time. And that predetermined period of time is currently 20 years. But that's also something to keep in mind, because that 20-year mark starts as soon as you initially file your disclosure. So a lot of times it's a lot shorter. For example, if you file your patent application, a lot of times the patent prosecution process takes a few years. By the time that time is told and you actually are granted a patent, say 3, 4, 5 years have passed, that still counts as part of your 20-year time period. So now we've kind of figured out what's covered by trade secrets, copyrights, and trademarks. But now we kind of want to go into the 3 different types of elements that are covered by patents themselves. Patents cover design. There are 3 different subtypes of patents. There's design patents, there's plant patents, and there's utility patents. And I have to be honest with you guys, 100% of the work that I deal with is utility patent based. So I have a very cursory understanding of design and plant patents. Design patents are IP rights that protect the visual design of objects that are not purely utilitarian. So there's some sort of unique or novel design element within a product that you release. You can protect that via patent. I don't really deal with that. That's more along the lines of designers, or I can imagine that architecture elements fall into that as well, or just kind of product design. There's also plant patents, where if you create a new cultivar of plant, if you do genetic research, some guys tweak different varieties of fruits or vegetables or plant. If you disclose the technique for creating that, you can also have a limited monopoly on that as well. But that's something else that I don't really deal with. That's more people of a biological background that go into patent law. The stuff that I really deal with are utility patents. Utility patents cover the creation of a new or improved and useful product, process, or machine. So the majority of items that I work with are people who are improving computer hardware and how computer hardware works, or they have a development in the computer software arena where they develop a new process or implementation, basically just new software that does new stuff, and they want to be able to protect that type of idea, and that's kind of what I deal with. But again, just to kind of give you an idea, the first question you have to ask yourself when you want to protect your intellectual property is, where do I fall in this whole categorization? And what kind of appropriate coverage do I need based on that as well? Because a lot of times, maybe you're looking at trade secret, maybe you're looking at covering it via copyright, maybe you're looking at it via patent. Because people come up to me all the time like, oh, can I protect my pictures with a patent? And so no, you can't, because that's a copyright, obviously a copyright IP arena and not a patent IP arena. So now that we kind of have a general idea as to what patents cover, it gets even more specific. There are actually 2 different ways to file a patent. There's something called a non-provisional patent, and there's also something called a provisional patent. And I'm going to start with the more, well, it's not really more common, but it's the stuff that I deal with on a more regular basis, which are non-provisional patents. Non-provisional patents are what we think of when we think of the stereotypical patent. It offers you 20 years of protection, and in exchange for complete disclosure that will enable one of ordinary skill in the art to reduce the item, in order to implement your idea, basically. And so there are a lot of caveats with this. So a lot of individual inventors come to me and say, hey, I want a patent. I want to have this full patent protection on my idea. How do I go about doing that? And I say, well, first of all, for an independent inventor getting a non-provisional patent, first off, I'll tell you right off the bat, it's very expensive. There's a multi-stage process. You have to conduct a disclosure where you basically talk to a patent attorney about your invention. And after discussing it with a patent attorney, you have to have an official document, an official patent application document prepared. And the patent application document has a specification that details your invention in extreme detail. And it includes a lot of figures, diagrams. It also includes a full detailed claim set. And right off the bat, just having all that prepared and filed, on average, I would say, costs about $10,000 to have prepared. And then once you file that with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So you file that. Anywhere from 1 to 2 years later, you get a response back from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office saying, okay, we've received your application. We've assigned it to a patent examiner. The patent examiner has reviewed it and compared it to existing prior art. And this is, most of the time, they come back and say, this is why your patent application is not allowable. And so you have to go back, and it's the patent examiner's job to adjust because basically the coverage, the scope and coverage of a valid patent rides on the claim set. So the claims are basically, they delineate the scope of what you're trying to claim as your novel patent. And so the patent attorney adjusts the claim set and argues with the examiner back and forth. It could happen over the course of 6 months, or it could happen over the course of several years. There are patents that I've been prosecuting where, based on the desired scope of coverage that you like, for example, if I have a client that has technology and they file a patent and they say, okay, this is kind of a low value patent, we're very flexible on the scope of coverage for our claim set. We just want to get it allowed quickly. I can amend the claims quickly. I can argue with the examiner. I can really work together with them to get it allowed in 1 or 2 iterations of prosecution, which would lower the cost. And then I'm saying the cost will probably be around 10 grand for the application, about 5 grand a pop for prosecution. You're talking about 20 to 25 grand getting your patent, all said and done, for kind of a broad, broad scope patent. But if you say, okay, this is a very high value patent, I want you to fight to the death and get the broadest possible scope of claims, what can happen is, especially if you get a combative examiner, the examiner comes back and says, this isn't patentable. You argue and say, yes, it is. They say, no, it's not. Then you have to appeal it. You go into appeals. The appeals process, by the way, you file an appeal, and then the examiner responds to your appeal brief, then you reply to their appeal, and then you sit there and wait for a board to respond, and that could take 2 more years on top of that. So this is getting stretched out. All of a sudden, we're talking 4, 5, 6, 7 years pass. Each response and rebuttal costs about anywhere from 3 to 5 grand. You're starting to get in like the $40,000 to $50,000 range for your coverage, just for patent protection.
Do you have any protection during that time?
No. Well, I mean, you kind of do, in the sense that you have your idea out there and you have a time stamp. We'll go into that too, as in terms of like making sure where your protection starts. But just giving you an idea, I mean, in sum, the non-provisional patent coverage arena is expensive, it's time-consuming, and it's very formalized. The majority of people that I know, you don't really do it on their own. You have to go through a patent attorney, because the patent attorney knows the balance of fine-tuning your patent to get the claim scope that is both competitive and valuable while still being able to advance prosecution in light of an examiner's prior art. So with that in mind, I almost always do not recommend a non-provisional patent application for an individual inventor, just because it's high cost, high complexity, very long, very time-consuming. For the individual inventor who wants to have protection for their idea, I recommend the provisional patent. So the provisional patent is a little bit different. The provisional patent actually doesn't offer you any I'd say it offers protection, but in an indirect way. So if you file a provisional patent is basically, you can draft the provisional patent yourself. A lot of times you take a white paper disclosure where you basically describe your disclosure in using as informal as formal or informal terminology as you'd like. You draw some pictures. They could be hand drawn and scanned into a PDF document, or you label the parts of your invention, how it goes together, or you can make a flow chart if it's a process, software process. Just kind of label it out. Enable one, like as I mentioned before, you don't have to. People come up to me as a side note and say, "Hey, I want to make this rocket ship or this, this new bicycle, but I haven't actually made it. I just have an idea in my head. Can I still patent that? I don't have it in my hands." And the answer is yes, you can do that. You don't have to reduce it to practice in order to patent it. The only criteria for having a valid patent is you need to enable somebody of ordinary skill in the art to reduce it to practice. So you have to provide instructions to somebody who's of ordinary skill in the art. So say it's a bicycle, right? You're making a new bicycle. You need to enable somebody of ordinary skill in the art, in this case like a bicycle mechanic or a bicycle fabricator, to create this new design for a bicycle. That's all you need to do. You don't need to make the bicycle. You don't need to have any tooling. You don't need to have any proof of concept. You just have to be able to enable them to do that. And so what the independent inventor can do is create this white paper, draw pictures, write out their impromptu kind of informal specification, and then you can go to a filing service online. Off the top of my head, I just ran in a non-provisional patent filing service on Google this morning. I ran into, there's like a half dozen companies that'll do help you, assist you with the filing process. It costs anywhere from $150 to $200 to do that, and you are able to achieve that gives you the timestamp on your non-provisional patent. And then, so what you're thinking is, why is this timestamp valuable? And in intellectual property, especially in the patent environment, having a critical date of filing is the most important aspect of patent protection, because the United States is a first to file system. So say there are two independent inventors, one's somewhere across the world from the other one, right? And they both come up with the same idea at the same time. And one of them, it's whoever gets to the patent office first and files it is the one who gets protection. But simultaneously, it's also it's the first initial disclosure. So somebody could post about it on their blog and publish it, and then all of a sudden it becomes prior art that combats the other filers' claim to being the first to invent on that. We'll get into that in the future as well. So basically, going back to the provisional patent, the provisional patent it's about $150 to $200 to create. The length of time that it's valid for is 1 year. So contrast that to the 20-year span of the non-provisional patent. It seems very small, but the purpose of the non-provisional patent is to kind of act as a bookmark to eventually spin it off into a non-provisional patent. So say you're an independent inventor, you have an idea, you want to eventually, you want to protect that idea, you want to protect your intellectual property, but you don't really have a lot of money right now to pour into intellectual property, but you still want to cover your idea. One thing to consider is file a provisional patent. Spend that $150, $200, get your idea out there, protect that idea with that timestamp, say, okay, I'm filing it on this certain date, this is my date of inception, I have a year from this date to be protected or to be able to spin this off into a non-provisional patent. What you can do is, after you file that, you can go and shop it around to venture capitalists or other corporations and say, hey, I have this great idea, I've filed for provisional patent protection, so my IP is covered, and would you like to acquire this information, or would you like to fund my corporation based around this new product or service or implementation? And then what it does is it enables a VC or another corporation to say, okay, well, not only does this person have an idea, but there is inherent value here in the IP realm as well that we could pour money into this and acquire their patent as well. Because what will happen is, if you don't protect your idea via a provisional patent, and you want to shop around and get some funding, right? Really, I mean, they've kind of parodied this in that show. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that TV show Silicon Valley, where they do the brain dump sort of disclosure, where they invite people in, new tech guys, and say, hey, talk to us about your idea. They get up there with the PowerPoint slides, they talk all about it. Company says, great. we're not interested right now, we'll see you later. And then a week later, they're doing the same exact thing. And you have no recourse because you have absolutely no IP protection on it. You just basically just gave away your trade secret for free. There was no, unless you have a non-disclosure agreement in place, and even with an NDA, it becomes complicated. You have one more element in your corner if you have that initial IP protection before you go in and take care of that. And we're talking about this 1 year tolling date with the provisional patent. So when it comes to disclosures in general, that 1 year timeline still holds. So, for example, this is why provisional patents are only good for a year. Sure.
Let me ask you, on the whole NDA process, does that have to match the provisional timeframe as well, or can that be longer? Can you buy yourself some time to go get more money?
Good question. The NDA, it also comes down to a contractual sort of thing, and contract attorney, whether it's a valid NDA or not. NDAs do not start that time period from tolling. So you should be good if you have a solid NDA in place, but you're also opening yourself up to potential. The first thing that a company is going to do is try to attack the NDA if something happens with that in terms of the timeline. And that kind of brings me into this next point too. It was a good segue because in order to file a patent, whether it's a provisional or a non-provisional patent, you cannot have disclosed your idea publicly later than a year prior to filing for protection. So the very first question, I conduct inventor disclosures on a regular basis, weekly. And my first question to these inventors is, have you ever disclosed this technology outside of a non-disclosure agreement, or has this ever been included in the product that's been made available to the public? Because what happens is people don't think about it, and they talk about it, or a lot of engineers, they have a blog where they get excited about a new technology and they want to talk about it, and so they quickly write about their technology and they post the blog, oh, this is my new idea. Especially a lot of people who are in the intellectual community, IEEE type stuff, where they have the conference coming up, they get excited about it, they want to tell everybody about their new idea, and all of a sudden, as soon as they start talking about it, you have that year tolling period before you can get protection. So we get a ton of non-provisional or a ton of provisional patent applications from all the corporations I work with prior to a lot of conferences because they just want to get that bookmark in there before they start talking about it to people. But a lot of times there's stuff like, it gets a little more complicated where it's like, okay, well, I had an improvement to an existing, we had this patch that fixed this, or we had this new feature for this existing software and we released it, but the code wasn't activated. It's difficult to reverse engineer. It's like it becomes more muddy. So when in doubt, get provisional patent protection before you release your idea into the wild. And also, it depends on your timeline too, as you mentioned. If you think it's going to take a lot longer to roll out, and if your timeline isn't within a year, you're shop it out, but you're going to shop it 5 years down the line. Maybe you do consider an NDA, keeping it trade secret beforehand, kind of keeping it close to the vest before you start talking to other people about it. But as I mentioned, it becomes tricky because then it becomes more of a contractual issue instead of a concrete patent issue. And I always have the idea of I always talk about the blog post, or like write an idea on a bar napkin these days. You write an idea on a bar napkin, you're talking to somebody, you have a couple drinks, like, oh, this is a great idea. He takes a picture of it with his phone. It's one of those things that this stuff like that gets dug up and it comes back to haunt you. And people come up to me and talk to me, so they get excited, they want to talk about their invention. Some friends of mine are like, oh, I have this idea about XYZ, and the first thing I say is just, don't talk to me about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about anything about your technology or your disclosure or anything, because I'm not your attorney. We're not dealing with this and it counts as a public disclosure. If you're talking to somebody that's, you're all excited about it, it could end up, you're shooting yourself in the back. So let's see. Okay, so that goes back to, I guess, in summary, we're talking about the best, what would my best practice recommendations be for an inventor? The first thing I recommend is keeping an inventor's log. So an inventor's log is good for a multitude of purposes. The first purpose for keeping an inventor's log is you basically are creating a repository of information that can be used for a white paper. You're also keeping, literally, if you keep an inventor's log and you're typing up your notes, and you're kind of summarizing your ideas and your developments, you can just compile that log into a provisional patent disclosure in a matter of a day or so, just by reconfiguring it, doing some minor editing. So it makes that the transition from an idea to a provisional patent disclosure very simple. I also recommend diagrams in an inventor's log, not only to help conceptualize the idea yourself, but also to help enable someone of ordinary skill in the art to reduce it to practice. Pictures are very helpful, and in fact, we do flow diagrams, and diagramming is a large portion of the patent preparation process. Another really good reason to keep an inventor's log is it helps you differentiate your intellectual property from the stuff that you create at your house and the stuff that you create at your employer's office. So a lot of times when you're employed by a corporation, they're going to say, okay, anything that you do in the scope of your work at work is our intellectual property. So you go home, you have this great idea, it's like tangentially related to what you're doing at work, but it's your own stuff, you're doing it. But if you're using stuff at work and you're kind of commingling the resources of work and home, it's going to be very difficult to fight for those rights, especially when you're fighting against a corporation, because they have a lot more resources than you do. They're going to come after you. They're going to claim that they actually have they own those intellectual property rights. So keeping an inventor's log at home, having your own separate home computer that's not, because a lot of times, when you work, oh, it's so nice, this corporation bought me a new laptop, get to take my own laptop home, my work paid for it. There's a reason why they pay for it. It's because anything you're doing on there is their stuff. So buy your own computer, keep your own separate computer with your own separate inventor's log, keep time and dates of disclosures, make sure you delineate the work that you're doing at home. It's almost a good idea to say where you were developing it, where you were working on it. Maybe if say, I'm looking at like 3D printers over here, if you're doing a prototype of something and your office has a whole bunch, it might be in your best interest to buy a separate one for yourself with your own money, take it home, work on your own development at home, separately, separate time. You have a very concrete log. That way, when you start working on your idea and your boss comes to you and wants to take over it, you say, hey, well, I've been working on this on my own time, my own equipment, my own resources. This is my idea, completely separate from what I'm doing at the other office. But if you're interested in acquiring it, we can talk, sort of thing. Yeah, so I think that's kind of where I stand. I mean, in sum, I always tell everybody, non-provisional patents, expensive, time-consuming, worthwhile if you are interested in long-term protection. One of my fellow attorneys at my office always used to tell independent inventors, statistically, 1 out of every 10 patents that is written is actually written in a valid way by a competent attorney, and of those, 1 out of every 10 will ever turn a profit. So it's kind of a 1 in 100 chance that you're going to get rich off your patent, or going to return revenue on your patent. And then even if you're making revenue on your intellectual property, is it going to overcome the cost of acquiring the intellectual property in the first place? The thing I think about is I'm also into I'm a big film shooter, film photographer, and there was this one guy who did this conversion of old camera to take new film, and he did a bunch of modifications. He spent tens of thousands of dollars patenting his process, and would go online and just annoy people to no end about how they were violating his patent, this and that. And the scope of his patents wasn't wide enough to cover these derivatives, and he had already explained to everybody how he did it. And so they were getting these knockoffs, but these knockoffs weren't violating his patent, and they found his constant assertion of his intellectual property rights to be kind of an annoyance, and he became known as like this kind of annoying, quirky guy. And so that whole, him attempting to have the intellectual property cover his idea kind of blew up in his face. So you also have to kind of think about your audience as well. I know a lot of times, another side story is I'm involved in professional brewing, and with trademarks it's the same sort of thing. Somebody has a trademark and there's a trademark violation, and a lot of times these, like a beer name will be similar to another one, or a brewery name will be similar to another one, and part of asserting your intellectual property rights is going after somebody when they violate it. You can't just sit back and say, okay, we're cool. You have to go after them. Otherwise, if you don't assert your rights, you risk it becoming general terminology and your trademark being null and void. But in the beer community, going after somebody for intellectual property rights is seen as a big no-no, and the aggressor will almost always be shunned. So you also have to understand your environment before you figure out what type of intellectual property protection you want to get, because if it's in an environment where that type of enforcement is frowned upon, you can end up shooting yourself in the foot as well. So it's yet another element to think about when you're looking to protect your idea. So yeah, consider a provisional patent. Consider a provisional, inexpensive, cheap, a quick, easy way to leverage your IP and kind of sweeten the pot with when shopping around with VC or looking to be acquired. It just adds IP to the deal, to your technology. Because this day and age, I mean, even though intellectual property has come a long way, a lot of major corporations don't appreciate intellectual property until they need it. For example, I have a lot of clients who come on, and when I talk to their in-house counsel as to why they came on board to start wanting to acquire intellectual property, the number one reason is usually because somebody sued them over intellectual property, and they had no defensive or offensive portfolio to protect themselves, and you end up getting, you know, they could really hit you hard with IP because it is a very valid lawsuit. All right. That being said, oh, and then what I can also go into, I know we have some younger people in the audience as well too. Just to give you guys an idea as to my career, kind of how I briefly highlighted how, you know, my time at PVNet and how that transitioned and my educational background. But just to kind of give you guys an idea as to how you become a patent attorney, because I never even knew, when I was in high school, I didn't even know a patent attorney was a job. I always just wanted to be an engineer, I wanted to be a computer scientist, that was it, and then I just kind of fell into what I was doing. Basically, to be a patent attorney, there are two bars. There's the California bar that you have to pass in order to become an attorney, and you also have to pass the patent bar. The patent bar is administered by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Organization, and it's, I mean, in terms of scope, I mean, the California bar is a 3-day test. The patent bar is only a 3-hour test. So even though it seems like it's long and overwhelming, it's actually much more straightforward to pass. You could take an online course, or I think I sent in for books to review the course. It's basically just, you end up, at least when I took it, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office reuses questions a lot, so you just end up studying and taking multiple tests until you see questions start to repeat themselves. And it's an open book exam, but the book is, you know, 5,000 pages long, so it's not like you can just kind of find it. You know, you have to really know. If you know about 75% of the answers, you can look up the remaining 25%. The pass rate is low. The pass rate's below 50%, but it's just because a lot of people take it and not a lot of people prepare for it. So if you prepare for it reasonably, there's your chances of success are quite high. And you do not have to be an attorney. There's two different occupations. You can be a patent agent or a patent attorney. I was a patent agent before I became a patent attorney, so you don't have to be an attorney. All you have to have, in order to sit for the patent bar, you have to have a degree in a hard science. So anything, you could have a degree in biology, chemistry, you know, I had mine in computer science, but realistically there's anything. And say you already graduated from undergrad and you didn't get a degree in a hard science, but you still want to become a patent agent or a patent attorney, there is a minimum amount of credits you could take. So you can go to like a junior college and take, I think it's like something like 12 or 14 credits, science-based credits. And once you get the requisite amount of hard science-based credits, then you can sit for the patent bar. And then once you do the patent bar, then you basically become a patent attorney. Or, you know, then you become a patent agent, and a patent agent can do almost the same thing that a patent attorney can do. There's a few things, like I don't think patent agents can conduct examiner interviews, where basically the USPTO, as I mentioned, they assign an examiner to your case, and you basically battle with the examiner over the claim scope, amending it, whatnot. I don't know if you can conduct an interview or you call them up and talk with them, unless you're an attorney. But I could be wrong. That was one of the differences, I think. But that kind of wraps it up for me.